slows the growth. We don't need to slow the growth of our property taxes here in Chautauqua County. We need to cut the taxes. 87% of the county tax levy is directly related to Medicaid and welfare. And that's why I've been focusing on major substantive reforms to those programs, so that we not only cut the cost on the state level, but we cut your property tax on the local level. I don't think it's enough for us to accept slower growth when we're already way too high. Our focus has to be on how we cut property taxes. And I'm particularly sensitive to the impact of the state government on that, not only as it relates to unfunded mandates, but the failure of the state to maintain its funding for our schools. Fredonia School District, for example, saw huge property tax increases. And it wasn't because their spending went up dramatically, it was because state aid went down. This last year, state aid for education went down 5%, while the basic welfare grant went up 10%. That, my friends, is the wrong priorities for this state. We need to invest in our education and plan for the future. We need to focus on the success of this state. And we need to change those priorities. And if I get into Albany, I'm going to work hand in hand with local officials as a positive partner with them to cut expensive state mandates, reduce the cost of our health insurance programs, for example, cut back on the pension costs, and help bring the cost of government in line so we can cut taxes on both the state and the local level.
Thank you. Ms. Barker, did you want to say something?
I would just say that I think we saw a good example in Massachusetts of their going to a property tax cap, and if we keep doing the same things in this state, even on the reform side is wonderful, and I support reforms in Medicaid and reforms in welfare, but this is not a time to tax ourselves out of the problems of New York State, and I think it's a temptation. I didn't hear my opponent address the sales tax question, part of that question. I guess he ran out of time, but I really will not carry an additional sales tax to Albany. I won't be that messenger. And as far as the property tax goes, I just think we have to do different things to get different results. And I support, I'm not sure the percentage. It could be, I've heard people say 2%, 4%. New Jersey has just gone to a form of it. It is difficult. The school districts are not favoring this, but I feel we have to give it a chance.
Thank you. Mr. McCormick, do you have a comment on this?
Sure. Property taxes are at everybody's forefront right now. Our school taxes are due the end of this month if you want to pay the penalty. But as far as the tax cap goes, there's been quite a lot of discussion from the Cuomo camp and some of the other folks about combining these jurisdictions. We heard it at the first panel this evening. There's in the village of Cuba, which is in Allegheny County, there's a vote just taken last week if they wanted to dissolve the village of Cuba. Now, maybe a lot of us have sat on village boards, town boards, county boards, and that vote was to keep the village of Cuba intact by a vote of 403 to 40. So I think when they start talking property taxes, sometimes local taxing authorities know that the school needs a roof, or the town needs a new snowplow truck, so maybe we should keep that.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Who wants to begin?
I'm glad to. One of the most frustrating things I've heard from school superintendents is the number of state mandates that they have to deal with that drive up their costs. Also, what's incredible is there's statutory and regulatory impediments for doing things in a more cooperative way. Recently, we heard a press release from 4 schools up in the north end, Chautauqua, Ripley, Westfield, and I think Brockton, that were talking about taking administrative services and restructuring them to reduce the cost of overhead, which is the right way to go. We have huge overhead here in Chautauqua County, in part because of all these state mandates. I'm very frustrated when I realize that pension costs went up about 40% in our school districts, 40%. We need to straighten out the pension system and move away from the current system into a more, in the future, for new employees, into, I believe, a defined contribution program. We also have to look at the cost on health insurance, which is driving up local school taxes. Many of you don't realize. Last year, the state legislature imposed a tax of $433 million on health insurance policies. You might be blaming your insurance company, or your doctor, or your healthcare professional, when in reality, your costs went up in large part because of the taxes, the hidden taxes imposed on that by the state legislature. So, in my opinion, we need to streamline the operations to enable school districts to cooperate more effectively. Last, that cut mandates, cut the cost. But last, I think the state has a responsibility to ensure that the funds that are being spent wisely, and that we are getting good educational outcomes at a reasonable price. And if that doesn't happen, I think the role of the state should be to go to the local school district, and I would start on the local level, and say, you have to address this problem. The state should then, to be continued.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to respond to the question there about the education in New York State. We're getting away from what we're trying to do here. We're talking about pension and teacher salaries and, mandates. The question we have to answer is the quality of the education. Is that child, when it comes to first and second grade, does that child think it's safe to be in school? And is the child happy to be there? And a lot of that has to do with some of our dedicated teachers and some of the dedicated staff at these schools. And as they go through the school system, when that child gets into 7th and 8th grade, where you start maturing, are the interests that he or she might have, does that school offer it, or have a chance to offer that child what he or she needs? And then also, when they get farther up in their secondary education, secondary or primary, like in the 10th, 11th, 12th grade, if they want to go to college, are they getting prepared for that? Certainly policies the state puts out. Our state is the primary, is primarily responsible for the education K through 12. But also, if the child is inclined for technical or a skill level, is the school guidance counselors pursuing that, where we can have skilled workers coming out of our high schools. So I don't want the discussion to be lost with money. It has to be the quality of education and the dedication of the student and also the providers.
There is so much frustration in the administration now about the state of New York making promises that they don't keep, and we have met throughout this campaign with people in education who are upset that they were promised money and then that money is not going to come, not just once during a school year, but maybe twice during a school year. And I think that that's completely irresponsible of New York State government. We can't continue to do that. They can't make their budgets. They can't operate that way. So that's something that has to happen in Albany differently. I believe we have to reduce on the administrative side the costs that we have for supervision. And that would include, again, back to the Lundin Commission. It's not pleasant to say that one of the items in their report was to have the state education commissioner, if districts don't do it on their own, actually mandate mergers. But 18 school districts, I think, is indefensible in terms of administration, and that money has to come down closer to where the students and the teachers are working together. I don't think you're talking about college education in your question, but New York State is the only state that has a tax on tuition, and here at Fredonia, I was made painfully aware of that by President Hafner. That's goofy, I think. And I would like to see us in New York State better utilize the facilities that we have, whether it means, I mean, the goal is to have the best grade for being educators in the state of New York, and maybe that means longer school days, and maybe it means longer school years. But I want to work with our school system and try to get our grade back up where we feel a little better about it than we do right now.
The questioner asked about school vouchers. Could you each just very briefly say whether you favor school vouchers or not?
Before we go back, can I have a rebuttal?
Yes, you want a rebuttal? Yes, go ahead.
As I mentioned, I believe the state has a role of ensuring high-quality education at a reasonable price. If that's not occurring, I think the state should identify the school that's having the problem, number one. Number two, the state should then require that school to come up with a remedial plan to solve the issue. Three, the state should provide technical expertise and supportive services and come to the school district with a host of options that show what have been done successfully in other areas. Four, we need to expand the options. It's not just a forced merger, which I wince at when you force anything. But certainly mergers is an option, but we ought to look at the possibility that maybe it makes better sense for the teachers to travel between the schools than to have everyone get on buses and travel. Ripley, for example, has a problem with language instruction. You can send a language teacher from Westfield to Ripley and provide the service without having to ship everyone from Ripley to Westfield. So that's the approach I'd call, ultimately ending if they can't solve it with a state solve. Did you want to address vouchers?
Well, just very briefly, because the questioner did ask about vouchers.
I don't have a